Well, good afternoon, everybody. I know people are going to take a few minutes to get in. We're going to let you do that on this Friday afternoon. In just a few minutes, I'll get us going and do some announcements and prayer and introduce Dr. Schlect. So we have about 35 people on the call today, and we'll give them just a few minutes to get in the webinar here. Are you in your office there, Chris?
Yeah, this is my office.
Yeah. And did you teach today?
I just came out of a big discussion of Thucydides.
Okay. Sorry, so you're primed for this call today.
I'm all ready to go. I've had to pivot from Thucydides to liberal arts.
Welcome, everybody. We're just giving a few minutes while everyone gets signed on, and then we'll get started in just a minute. All right, looks like we're up to about half. I'm going to go ahead and get us started, and we'll let the rest of the folks join as they're able to get here. Well, good afternoon. My name is Eric Cook. I'm the president with the Society for Classical Learning. We're honored to have Dr. Chris Schlect here to talk about what is a liberal art and what do we mean by the term. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. And thank you for being here, Chris. We appreciate it very much.
I am honored to be here. Thanks a lot, Eric.
Yeah, so a couple announcements before we get started. One is if your school has not taken advantage of SCL institutional membership, we want to encourage you to do that. We've had this fall probably the most amount of interest and more members added than probably any window of time that we've been doing this. And we want to be able to make our resources available to you and get those, of course, at a discounted rate, but a growing network of people who are able to serve you and all the needs of your school. So please look into that and let us know if you're interested in pursuing that further. We also, even though our most of our fall cohorts and workshops have begun, we are able to kind of sneak in a little after it gets going, so you're not miss too much. So if you really wanted to get in there and be part of one of the cohorts or workshops, then let us know and we'll see about getting you involved there. And then we have our fall retreat coming next week. Unfortunately, it's sold out, or fortunately, you can look at it both ways. Unfortunately, if you haven't signed up yet, but we have over 100 people coming here to Richmond next week. And we're really looking forward to that. Got a great group and a great lineup there. We also have our winter symposium coming in Atlanta in February. So if you missed out on this one, you could join up for that one anytime. We are going to be recording today's call. So if you only have to, get to part of it and you want to join and see it later, or you want to share it with folks later, you can come back to the site shortly and be able to get it and listen to the whole thing. So you can do that later if you need to. Also, as Dr. Schlect he's going to do about 20 minutes of an opening here and talk about what are the core of the idea. And then he and I are going to have some Q&A, and then I'm going to open it to you. However, if you have questions that you think of as he's presenting or as I'm doing some of the Q&A, you can put those questions in the Q&A down at the bottom there, and we will capture those and make sure we get to them when we turn the questions over to the audience. So feel free to do that as we get going, and Marissa will capture those and make sure we don't miss them. So once we get going here, Chris will take about 20 minutes to unpack the topic for today. And then I'll spend about 15 or 20 minutes asking him some questions. And then again, we'll turn it over to you guys, and you can have the opportunity to interact with Chris and ask the questions that you have to ask. So let me pray for us, and then I'm going to introduce Chris and let him get going. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for the great work that you're doing in our schools across the country and even across the world. Thank you for your faithfulness. Thank you for the privilege to be able to shepherd so many young minds and hearts. And we pray for your grace as we do that. Thank you for Chris and his ministry, his work, his expertise, his knowledge and wisdom. And we pray you would bless him today in this conversation, and may everything we do be for your glory and honor. In Jesus' name, amen. So Dr. Schlect is the Senior Fellow of History at New St. Andrews College in Moscow, Idaho. He has served there as the Chair of Humanities and the Director of the Classical and Christian Studies Graduate Program. And he's worked in classical and Christian education for 30 years. So he's more experienced than most of us. I'm not going to say that makes you old, but he's been at it a long time. And I had the privilege, along with our entire Gordon College Master's cohort this summer, to learn from Chris here in Richmond. He taught a class on academic leadership, which really covered the history, philosophy, pedagogy, and practice of classical Christian education. And we dug into this topic, and it was, I will say, both enlightening and a bit unsettling. So I talked to him then about coming back, possibly even writing something, which he has done, and then also coming back and having a public conversation about this particular topic. So, we use these terms, liberal arts, and we do so in a variety of different ways. And that's happened not only within the classical Christian world, but outside of it, to the degree that it's very hard to even know what we're talking about, which is what Chris takes up in his paper, which I also wanted to mention and highly recommend to all of you. The title of it is, What is a Liberal Art? And it just came out in the Principia publication, which is brand new. And just scanning that, Chris's article is the only one that I've read, but it looks fantastic. So I highly recommend that you look at that entire publication, but specifically Chris's article in here, which he will talk about today, but which is very nicely laid out in the article and something you could use in professional development at your own school. So I highly recommend that you get that and also discuss it with your faculty. So without further ado, Dr. Schlect, thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to you and talk about what a liberal art is.
All right, thank you, Eric. And again, thank you all for being here. I love this topic. It's a challenging topic, and I want to explain that. The challenge arises from the fact that the term liberal art is just so commonly used. We know the joke, I'm a liberal arts major, would you like fries with that? Or would you leave room for cream? And we're used to the term, but its familiarity is what creates the problem. What is it that we're talking about? My own conversation and reflections on this arises from my own context here at New St. Andrews College, where I am. Our degree name is a liberal arts. We have a liberal arts degree. It's called Liberal Arts and Culture. And what do we mean by that? If we call ourselves a liberal arts college, have we defined that? Now, in popular parlance, we know that whatever liberal arts is, it's probably not math, it's not STEM. We kind of have this instinct about what it's not. But what if some scholar wrote a history of technology? A history of technology, it's history, but technology, is that liberal arts not? How do we know? And as part of a thought experiment I undertook, I tried to ferret out what the term actually means in its present day usage among educators. And one way to go about this is to look at universities. I'll call them big box store mainstream universities. A lot of universities have different colleges of law, college of medicine, but some of them have colleges of liberal arts as an organizational unit in their academic program. One interesting observation I'll make is some universities have organized, for example, College of Arts and Humanities. The University of Maryland is an example, and I could just pull any random examples. But then the University of Oregon or the University of Colorado has a College of Arts and Sciences. Now I see Eric, you're wearing a shirt from the University of Kentucky. So the University of Kentucky has a College of Arts and Sciences is one of its organizational units for its academic program. So here's a question that I'll ask myself in front of us all here. So suppose I were to study history at the University of Kentucky, that means that I'm studying history within the auspices of a College of Arts and Sciences. But if I were a history major at the University of Maryland, I'd be studying history in the auspices of a College of Arts and Humanities. So if I'm studying history in arts and sciences, does that pull history as a field in one direction? But if I study it in a College of Arts and Humanities, does that pull history into another direction? And what's the arts, if it's arts and sciences or arts and humanities, is the term art elastic so that when you couple it with science or when you pair it with humanities, the term art is going back and forth? What is a liberal art? And what you'll find is basically a cacophony. And when you look at the major fields of study that are grouped in these colleges and the major fields of study that are grouped in other colleges, like the colleges of some places, you'll have there's a College of Science. In other universities, you'll have a College of Natural Science. And you try to parse, okay, what goes into the bucket of liberal arts and what goes outside the bucket into some other bucket. And I think the conclusion you'll come to is that there is no stable meaning of the term. You're just going to get frustrated. And I find this frustration a real problem when it's educators who are using the term. I really don't have a problem with the street lingo. What's a liberal arts? Can you have fries with that? Popular parlance, we can allow some slop and give and take, play in the joints. But if we are educators, then the terms that we use to define our project and to shape our mission, to identify what we are and what we do, we should actually have some coherence in our usage of the terms. And how much more is that true when the guild that we're part of is a guild that traffics in scholarship? The terms of our own guild, we should know what we're talking about. And so this is what launches me into this need to clarify what incarnation we mean by liberal arts. And the term has historical usage. And historical usage also has a little play in the joints too. And maybe we can talk about that more in the Q&A. But what I'd like to proceed to do is to move us toward a definition. And I've got a definition that is workable and that we institutionally here at New St. Andrews, my home institution, finds workable. And there might be some variations that we might arrive at here. But what I'd like to do is just very briefly kind of derive a definition of liberal arts and to derive it in such a way that gives due to the usage across time, over time, and lets the weight of tradition speak into it so that we can converse in a meaningful way. And along the way, I should also suggest this: if we come up with a good term or definition of liberal arts, along the way, we should also know what we mean by other terms of our trade. What is a science? What are humanities? And all of those associated terms. And so if we say liberal arts, is that just synonymous with humanities? Or is it different? Is there some overlap? How would we know? And so we need some definitions and clarity. And I think this is missionally important for us all to do. So to walk through then, if we have a liberal art, it's a certain kind of art. We've got other terms or modifiers for the term art. Fine arts. Is a liberal art the same as a fine art? Some people will say fine arts are subsumed within liberal arts. Are liberal arts sort of different categories of art? So I think in order to settle what kind of what a liberal art is, we need to figure out what an art is in the first place. A liberal art is a certain kind of art, and there presumably might be other kinds of arts besides liberal ones. So what's an art? And I think a definition needs to start there. What is an art? And art is, I'm going to follow Aristotle here, and I'll characterize or paraphrase Aristotle, where he says art is productive reason, or reason that's ordered to production, reason ordered to making something, to producing something. So it's not reason that's mere contemplation. It's reason that contemplates extending its product out into the world and out into something else. It's that kind of reason. And I can illustrate this then with what an art is. So let's take someone who produces bread. Let's take someone who produces bread. Someone who makes bread takes a certain clump of ingredients and performs a process on those ingredients, and bread results. Now, that person has produced bread, but maybe he got it, that came out by dumb luck. Okay. But then suppose he remembers what he did. And so he takes similar ingredients and says, I'm going to repeat that process. And I'm going to perform the similar process on a similar ingredients. And so bread produced, he produces bread a second time. The first time he produced bread by dumb luck. The second time he produced it by experience and memory. Okay. At this point, what we have is someone who's a technician, maybe a craftsman or something like that. And he's able to produce bread. He can repeat the process. But when he starts applying reason to it and exploring why and how and develop precepts about it, precepts so that he can teach and explain the whys and wherefores of it to someone else, then bread moves from becoming a habit or a practice or a craft, and it gets elevated to becoming an art. It's reason, once you develop precepts and principles by which it works, reason ordered to the production of bread. So we'll call him a baker, and this is the art of baking then. Before he baked just as a technician, and now it becomes an art when you apply reason to it. Can be taught, you can theorize about it, and you maybe can make intelligent, thoughtful modifications. That's what makes something an art, not a mere practice. Okay, not a, and so that's what an art is. Reason, it's productive reason once you theorize about it, and it makes it uniquely human. Only humans can be artists. You know, animals can produce things, like beavers can produce dams, but I don't think we would call them artists. They just do it by instinct and that sort of thing. So I don't think they're theorizing about it. Now, so that's what an art is. It's productive reason. Then there are different kinds of arts that have to do with what they're ordered to producing. So the art of baking is it's reason ordered to the production of edible baked goods. Okay, but there are other kinds of arts. For example, there are mechanical arts. Mechanical arts are ordered to the production of useful objects. So the art of baking produces bread. The art of carpentry produces shelves, furniture. The art of cobbling produces shoes. The art of smithing produces metal tools and other metal implements. The arts of weaving and sewing produce fabric and clothing. The art of farming produces crops. All of those arts that I just listed, I would classify them as mechanical arts. Mechanical arts are that collection of arts that are ordered to the production of useful objects. So it's productive reason that produces useful things, and the different kind of useful things will tell you which kind of mechanical art it is. So baking, carpentry, those are all mechanical arts. Now we can talk about fine arts as another subset of arts, another classification of arts. Now, if mechanical arts is reason ordered to the production of useful objects, fine arts are arts that are ordered to the production of objects that exist not for their usefulness, but for their beauty. So the art of sculpting, that's a fine art, that produces statues. The art of flower arranging produces bouquets. The art of songwriting produces songs. Embroidery produces decorative pillowcases, tapestries. These are all fine arts. So there's different arts in there within that broader classification of fine arts. That's reason to the order to the production of objects that exist not for their usefulness, but for their beauty. In incidentally, the term fine arises from the Latin fine, meaning final. That means these are objects that are ends and of themselves rather than objects whose end is to be used to another purpose. Like mechanical arts, for example, carpentry might produce chairs, but chairs is for sitting in. So that's what I mean by useful objects. Fine arts are final, whereas you produce a sculpture not because you're servicing some other purpose, some other usefulness, but it's final. And so that's what makes a fine art a fine art. So we've got these classifications for arts, and art is productive reason. And those collections of arts that produce useful objects, those are mechanical arts. Objects of beauty produced by fine arts. And so then we're talking about then what is a liberal art, different types of arts. And a liberal art is reason that is ordered to the production of other knowledge. Okay, that's what a liberal art is. It's reason that's ordered to the production of other knowledge. The idea of a liberal art, and we see this in the tradition when liberal arts are described. When you master liberal arts, you then grow equipped to master any domain of knowledge, any other domain of knowledge. So it's reason ordered to the production of knowledge and of further learning. A liberal art is ordered to the production of knowledge and learning. Now the term liberal, of course, means you're liberated from something. There are different notions of what the liberal arts means. When you read the Greeks and the Romans, particularly Aristotle or the Roman Seneca, they'll say that a liberal art liberates you from subsistence tasks, subsistence labor. So they'll talk about servile arts versus liberal arts, and servile arts might include the mechanical arts and might actually include fine arts. Those are arts that you need to do to tend to your food, clothing, and shelter, whereas the liberal arts are the arts that free us from those earthy concerns and from those practical concerns. And we see that impulse in the tradition. That's what you're being liberated from. But there's another dimension to liberal that I prefer to take up. Being a Protestant, I think that actually earthy, worldly, and productive concerns are not servile. That ancient notion of liberality has a weird kind of social class stratification idea, like, this hard boundary between slave and free man. So slaves attend to your subsistence. A free man tends to like intellectual pursuits that have nothing to do with subsistence. And so that dimension we find in some voices of the tradition express liberal arts that way. That's what you're being liberated from, is subsistence labor. But there's another impulse that we also see in the tradition of what you're being liberated from. And a liberal art is an art that liberates you from ignorance. And so it's productive of knowledge. It's productive of knowledge that's a gateway to other domains of knowledge. And it liberates you from the slavish dependence upon a teacher. It liberates you from the dependence upon someone else to direct your knowledge for you. Okay. So to study the liberal arts, you're basically liberated from a slavish dependence upon teachers. Okay, now what I mean by that, and I need to distinguish it from what I don't mean by that. If you study the liberal arts, that does not mean you grow out of teachers. Okay, what it means rather is that you are no longer part of someone else's program of dictating the course of your learning for you. So if you're trained in the liberal arts, you're actually free to summon up universes, even libraries of teachers, and put them to your service. So if I have studied the liberal arts, then I can take up and learn from a whole library of teachers. I can learn from Plato and I can learn from Galileo and summon them as teachers. I've studied the liberal arts, so I'm free to pursue other domains of knowledge, including the whole universe of teachers. So what the liberal arts liberate us from is ignorance, and it's the kind of ignorance that also renders us slavishly dependent upon other teachers to direct our knowledge for us. So that's the freedom, the liberation that the liberal arts signal. So that's what we mean by the liberal dimension of liberal arts. And we see this dimension of liberality in the liberal arts in several voices in the tradition. Cassiodorus picks up on it. Hugh of St. Victor picks up on this. That is indeed what they mean by liberal arts. Basically, if you studied the liberal arts, from there you can go anywhere else in fields of knowledge. So the liberal arts are crucial then within education for that reason, because it's these arts that train you to become then educated in anything. From the liberal arts, you can go on to the theory of carpentry, the theory of medicine, you can go on to domains of philosophy, you can go on to astrophysics, you can go on to anywhere else you want to go. If you've studied the liberal arts, you're free to pursue them. So art is productive reason, and so a reason to the order to the production of something. A mechanical art is reason that is ordered to the production of useful objects. A fine art is reason that's ordered to the production of beautiful objects. Liberal art is reason that is ordered to the production of further knowledge, and that's what a liberal art is. So we've talked about arts, we've talked about different kinds of arts, and one of those kinds is liberal art. It's something that's fairly unique. And then there are other terms that then start playing into the mix, like humanities here, where I would say liberal arts have some interesting overlap with humanities. There are terms like sciences that can play into this mix here. But at this point, I think I want to leave it at that, and maybe some of this can come up. We can yield some of this in Q&A. But the liberal arts then are basically reason ordered to the production of further knowledge. And we can get more technical and well developed with our definition. But there we go. That's my sketch and the basics of defining liberal arts.
Great, thank you, Chris. Let me follow up and kind of get right to it. That I know some of the questions will no doubt go down this road. So you're very familiar with, all of the schools and sort of the different models and ways in which liberal arts has been utilized within our classical Christian schools.
Right.
So tell me what you have seen there in terms of the range of definitions and utilization of liberal arts, and how that is either, one, motivated you to get clarity, because I know part of that you were doing for your own experience at NSA. Right. Tell me what, in terms of the landscape and the usage, what you observed, and two, what's your take and even critique of that?
Yeah, very good question. I think there are sort of three leading models that I can think of that get at your question, and it's probably a little simplistic, but I would say one would be the Sayers-Wilson model that puts the trivium in the foreground, and the trivium, grammar, dialectic, rhetoric. Then I would say there's the Littlejohn Evans model. That's so in the first, I'd say the Sayers-Wilson model. I would also add to that voice Susan Wise Bauer. That's the Dorothy Sayers model, and probably the most prominent promoter of the Sayers model, I'd think, is Susan Wise Bauer in homeschool context and the well-trained mind. So that's one of them. Then again, back to Littlejohn and Evans in their book Wisdom and Eloquence, have another presentation where they talk about the 7 liberal arts. So we've got a trivium model, which sometimes are called liberal arts, sometimes not. It's just the trivium. Then we've got the 7 liberal arts of Littlejohn and Evans. What's interesting about Littlejohn and Evans is that they take the 7 liberal arts as coextensive with all of learning. So in other words, if it's learning, then it falls somewhere within one of the 7 buckets of the 7 liberal arts. Okay. Mm-hmm. So if this is all that can be learned, then you divide this into 7 and you've got the 7 liberal arts. Okay, so that's Littlejohn and Evans. And I think sometimes when you see like Isidore of Seville sometimes talks that way about the 7 liberal arts, that's a voice from the past. And so Littlejohn and Evans will take something like computer programming, and they will canvas the 7 liberal arts for the right file drawer to put in computer programming, right? Because the 7 liberal arts is coextensive of all learning. Then you have Kevin Clark and Ravi Jain. And I would say that's the third model within our circles of the 7 liberal arts. And they've got the 7 liberal arts. And once again, it's the same arts: grammar, dialectic, rhetoric, the trivium. And then they have the quadrivium: arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, music. But Clark and Jain put those 7 and nestle it within a much broader program of learning. So the 7 liberal arts are not coextensive with all that can be learned, but rather they have a certain place within a broader project of learning. So model 1, you've got the trivium. Those grammar, dialectic, rhetoric really are maybe the liberal arts. Actually, the term liberal arts isn't really discussed around the trivium people. Then you've got the 7 liberal arts meaning everything. And then you've got the 7 liberal arts meaning not everything, but something important amidst other things that are important. And so I think that's where we are in the landscape. And that's kind of some of the dust that's kicked up in the landscape, and trying to navigate through all of those. And that's part of the challenge. And then you're going to find people picking and choosing different voices from the past, different testimony from ancient and medieval educators to try to substantiate that position. But of course, we're trying to deal with the 7 liberal, we're dealing with the liberal arts in a modern context. So everyone's making adjustments and adaptations.
Right. So you say in the paper, that what we're not trying to do here is you use the term reenact, something that from a previous period. So there's been no doubt confusion and muddled versions of trying to put this together. But you do say in here that history offers no stable consensus on the definition of the term liberal arts. And so I'm curious if you think that those 3 models that you articulated that are representative within the current classical Christian movement are problematic and are an error, and that what you've described is a more accurate representation, or would you say you also have kind of chosen from the past and created a different category? So help me understand that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and Eric, you're right. In terms of defining a liberal art, when you read voices from the past, you read the Romans and guys like Seneca and Cicero, they capture something a little bit different than what you see in Cassiodorus, which is different than what you're going to see in Isidore of Seville or Boethius. And then we've got Hugh of St. Victor. They use a lot of the same terms, but they have different ranges of meaning. And so each one who uses the term, I think, is really coherent, but that doesn't mean that they mean the exact same thing as the next guy who uses the term, who's also coherent, but maybe is capturing some different elements to it. So that's what I mean by history doesn't offer a stable consensus. I do think that history presents a stable conversation. I'll put it that way, where I think that these writers across time are in conversation with one another, and you can follow the conversation. It's not like it's just cacophony and everyone's deciding what is right in their own eyes. So there's stability, but it's not stability of definition. Because people nestle the liberal arts within different connotations and visions, it emphasizes different things. So I would criticize, I think, some formulations of, the Sayers, Wilson, Susan Wise Bauer on the one hand, and also the Littlejohn and Evans, where they are capturing some important things from the tradition, but in their bringing it into contemporary times, they are making adjustments that would make some of their terms unrecognizable to those who used it. I think Clark and Jane actually probably do the best job out there. And I think and if those of you who are familiar with their book, The Liberal Arts Tradition, I think Clark and Jane are much more sensitive to some of these concerns and issues. And because of that, I think that they actually have a lot of clarity. But then Clark and Jane, their own formulation then is going to be something that would make someone like Isidore of Seville scratch his head, would make Boethius scratch his head. But I think that that's true of anybody's formulation.
Yeah.
What separates Clark and Jane is I think they know it and they do it with eyes wide open, with clarity rather than in a muddle. I think they contribute to clarity rather than undermine clarity.
Do you see that as a sort of maturing of the movement as we've gotten further into this?
Yeah, definitely. I would I would say that definitely is a maturing of the movement. You know, with Dorothy Sayers, for example, you know, she's got her trivium, grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric, and she's attaching that to cognitive stages. One of the things that is patently clear to anyone who reads the history of education, that through the tradition, cognitive stages matter. You know, the Romans paid attention to that. The early medievals paid attention to that, certainly, you know. And so Sayers attaches medieval terminology, grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric to these cognitive stages. It's that linking that is actually not really historical. We see the cognitive stages in history and we see the terminology in history. Sayers' innovation is to take two things that are in the tradition and then combine them in a way that's kind of unique and interesting. But that's an innovation.
Yeah,
I would suggest that anyone who's involved in classical education has to make a move like that.
Yeah,
to bring it to, and I guess what I'm urging us to do is when we make a move like that, if we want to actually receive wisdom from the tradition, let's be clear when we're doing it, how we're doing it, so that we can actually be in a genuine conversation with the tradition. I said that the conversation is coherent, even though there's different terms and categories that are brought to bear. And that's really what my call is. And I think again, back to Clark and Jane, I think your question has to do with the maturing of the movement. I think that the movement has matured. The more we dip into and tap into the resources of those who have been in this conversation throughout the ages, which we need to be doing, we're going to get better at talking to them. Okay? We're not trying to reenact what they're doing, but we should be trying to learn from their wisdom and let them speak into our age, which means we need to come to terms with them. And that's really what the call is here.
Yeah, no, that's good. A few more minutes, I'm going to turn these questions over to you guys. One thing that you and I have talked about that I think is important, I just want to put in the form of a question here. So if, you know, even on the call, if we went through every person here and said, at your school, how does this work itself out? We would get a variety of answers, probably potentially all three even represented. So how do you think how we should posture ourselves to others in the movement who are figuring this out, or maybe even have really strong convictions about the one way that they do it and have talked about it, and might even, you know, receive this as a little bit threatening of, hey, we've been doing this thing for so long. Now you're telling me, you know, we're not even using it the right way.
Yeah, I think it's got to begin with clarity. Rather than muddle. And this, again, what is a liberal art? This is actually a project in defining. If you define well, that doesn't mean you're delivering a good education, right? But if we're going to innovate, or if we're going to communicate what we're doing, suppose I'm a headmaster and I want to onboard a new faculty member, and that onboarding means, okay, what's the mission and vision of our school? And we're moving in this direction. don't we want clarity in what that direction is? Like, isn't there a difference between heading east and heading north? You know, and if I say east and someone else thinks north, that's a problem.
Yeah.
And so I think this is kind of an antecedent step. I might have some convictions about that we all need to be going north, but let's be sure that I know what my conviction is in a way that communicates it to other people, so that if someone disagrees with me, it's not semantic, it's actually substantive. And even if we disagree, let's know where we disagree so that we can then mix it up and rub against one another rather than talking past one another. And I think that's going to advance and service the movement.
Yeah, and I think a level of humility about all of this is important as we all, are learning and will be. It's not as if even a decade from now, there'll be one more book that comes out that settles it all, and then we'll have it all cleaned up and ready to go. I think it's important that we understand people are figuring this out, and there's always going to be more learning to be acquired. And so, pointing fingers or kind of posturing ourselves against one another really doesn't make any sense to do, given what you stated and the learning curve that we're all engaged in here. So,
well, and let me just say, I'm all for having arguments with one another. I mean, if Eric, if you and I are in a room for a couple of days, you and I are going to find some places where we disagree. I would, and you can take any group of people in classical education to follow out my picture here, but I would want to actually have my ideas come up against your ideas in a way that they actually really are your and my ideas, rather than my cartoon of your idea and have you react to the cartoon of my idea, right? And that's where definition becomes so important. And if we're educators and we say liberal arts, if we say humanities, if we say sciences, what on earth do we mean and what are we talking about? And if we want to learn from past voices, how are they using the terms and how am I using the term? Again, sometimes, we use these, the terminology of classical education in the sense of slogan and flag waving. And it becomes this silly enterprise, like here's an absurd example. If we take a term like gay, imagine someone opening up a Shakespeare play and reading the term gay in, suppose it shows up in Macbeth or something like that. And the reader thinks, oh, he's talking about a homosexual. We all know that that's absurd, right? I think classical educators sometimes fall into that type of error because we've got some terminology, and liberal arts is one of them, humanities, sciences, and we think this is the historical way, when in fact, we're taking some of our ideas about what the term means are actually a colossal muddle, and then reading that back into the sources. We want the sources talking to us.
That's good. And I think you did a great job of that in the class, and that's something for all of us to really be careful and thoughtful about what we mean. I think that's one of the clear things that you articulate in the paper. There's a call in there to say, if we're going to enter into this, as you started out with, and we're going to be institutions that, claim to be liberal in what we're doing, and then it behooves us to really take these seriously and to really define what we mean and do the hard work, to figure it out. It has implications for how we educate all the kids in our school. So I do appreciate that very much. I'm gonna turn the questions over now, and I'm gonna have Jeff first. I'm gonna read his question, and then we're gonna open it up here and let you guys ask whatever questions you'd like to Dr. Schlect. So Jeff asks, do you think music is the most important of the 7 liberal arts? Could a biblical argument be made for this claim?
Yeah, no. At the end, the most important of the liberal arts, the answer is no, and the reason being is that I am not sure that I want to give that moniker to any of the 7 liberal arts. But I think the bigger question is, why do you care what I think? what does the tradition represent to us on a question like that? I'm just one voice in here. And so it would be really interesting to ask, what is music to Augustine? What is music to Boethius? What's music to Hugh of St. Victor? And then how does that register? And actually with those three voices, I just mentioned Boethius, Augustine, and Hugh of St. Victor, they actually present music as important, but in different ways and for slightly different reasons and for slightly different purposes. And I want to learn what all three of those authors have to say. And then I might position myself relative to them, right? So anyway, to answer the question, do I think music is important? Yes. I would even say really, really important. There was two reallys. Most important? No.
Jeff, any follow-up to that? You can unmute yourself if you want to ask Chris any follow-up to that.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Chris, for that reply. Your final comment keeps my mind open on the question, though, when you said really, really important.
Right.
And the second part of that question was, I appreciate what you said. What does Augustine have to say? What does Boethius? But also, what might God have to say? Like, does he give us any guidance about? Because in a way, and really to the point of this discussion, this is man constructing a sense of how we think about the capacities God's given us for reason, for the works of reason, et cetera. And yet God has revealed to us, right? There's this revelatory, and I asked the question because I think it's fun for conversation, if for nothing else.
I think it's a valuable question. And I think that theologically, you could say Christ is the Logos, he's the Word of God. And there's a privileging, some might argue from that, there's a privileging of the linguistic arts because of the incarnation of Jesus Christ, which would present an argument that music is actually secondary to the linguistic arts. I'm not saying that I would follow that line of reasoning. What I'm suggesting, though, is theologically, there's some really interesting things to contemplate. I might be persuaded of that. I'm still working on it.
Well, and again, I appreciate that too. I've been playing with the idea that, just again, we question things and think through it. I know we've all heard it said many times that music is very mathematical. And I think I've been pondering, like, if you think about it from the liberal arts perspective, I think it's better to say math is very musical. And that's a significant difference. Same with language, that language is quite musical. When you think about just the intonation and that God's put a voice in us. So anyway,
okay, so are you saying that in a way that it would be, are you suggesting, Jeff, that it would be improper to suggest that music is linguistic? I'm willing to concede your point that language is musical. Will you concede my point that music is linguistic?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, there we go.
But we often only say it in one direction. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, I rarely hear somebody say
on which circles you traffic in. Here at New St. Andrews, music is actually a really, really big deal. Back to the two reallys again. and maybe I don't travel in the same circles as you do.
Yeah, well, I'm sure. Yeah, your circles are much wider and bigger. I was just saying, in my little world, so often people think of, they think of the idea of saying that something is mathematical, even that phrase, we usually think more in terms of number sense. And you think about the way that number sense is understood via the liberal arts, right? That it's discrete quantity in a space, right? But we think so often math is the systems, again, of man, the algorithmic systems, et cetera. And then we just so often, maybe it's just playing with words and having fun with that. But maybe I'll say that music is my favorite liberal art. Put it that.
So there we go. That's count me down for music. We're going to be singing music in glory. I mean, what are we going to be doing for eternity?
Amen.
So I'm not going to, if you're going to try to provoke me into downgrading music, I will not be provoked. But that doesn't mean I'm going to fall into the ditch of elevating music over other things that I don't think it should be elevated above.
All right, let me get to Russ's question real quick. Thank you, Jeff. Russ asked, could you clarify the move that Sayers makes with the application of cognitive stages and definition of the liberal
Yeah.
arts? What
All right.
needs to be explicitly stated about her innovation?
Yeah, so Sayers, first of all, is not innovative on cognitive development. She is not innovative on that. People have claimed that she is. If you study modern psychology, Sayers gave her address, I think in 1947. She is not using the language of psychology that was in vogue at the time. When she talks about cognitive development, I would say, and she presents it this way, it is not cognitive science. She is talking about the folk wisdom of Poll, Parrot, Pert, and Poetic. She is very much alien to modern psychology. But she, and I call that folk wisdom, and that's just her take on something that is a folk observation that I think accords with my personal experience. I honestly think it accords with most people's experience about what little kids are like, about what middle kids are like, and about what older kids are like. And she's just making a folk observation. What's important about that is that that's not innovative. In fact, those same observations, not with Poll, Parrot, Pert, Poetic, those same observations you can find in He of St. Victor. You'll find those same folk observations about, what, little kids memorize well. They're just kind of like that. That's true of my experience as a granddad with my grandkids. And that's true of my experience reading Quintilian, who comes right out and says it. Okay. So when Sayers identifies these stages, she is identifying something that has been recognized across the ages. Okay. The stages that Sayers has is not an innovation. Sayers' innovation is this, to take something else that is also in the tradition, grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric, and to attach them to those stages. It's the attachment that is the innovation. It's not the observation about child development. And she's not trying to be psychological. And moreover, I would say that every educator should pay attention to that. If you're designing a scope and sequence in your school, you should recognize that little kids process things different than middle kids who process things different than your 11th and 12th graders. That should be reflected in the manner in which you teach and what you teach. So it's the attaching those stages to grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric. That's the novelty of Sayers.
Would you go further than that? Because, it gets confusing, and a lot of,
Right.
I mean, I would say, the school that Covenant where I was head for 13 years,
Right.
There was kind of a progression,
Mhm.
even going into, we kind of loosely, use some of that language to where we didn't use it hardly at all. And partially because of what you're saying, and some development, and I would say maybe even some refinement in thinking about it. But, when you start thinking about methodology,
Mhm.
you using the term as methodology, grammar, logic as mainly pedagogical method, you get into things like the grammar of grammar, the
Right.
kind of learning of a topic. And it makes it really confusing.
Right.
So I guess, would you go further in saying that's not what a liberal art is? And we've kind of, now I mean, how far would you go in saying, is that helpful? Or is that okay to innovate like that? Or are you?
I think I'll put it this way. Not only is it okay to innovate like that, anyone who says that they're not doing it is lying and fooling themselves. And that's where, like, there's a cadre of Sayers detractors out there that befuddle me, as if they've come up with some sort of like historical purity, when we are all this is, and this steps back to my original purpose here. Let's get some clarity here so we can talk sense to one another. And when there's some things that I'm doing that are And adaptation, again, we're not reenactors to an observation you make. If we're not reenacting, say, medieval cathedral schools, I've got a school in the 21st century, yet I want to be conversant with voices from the past. Let's be clear about what we're doing, and I am making adjustments. And if you think that there's some sort of like this pure ossified thing that comes down and incarnates, you're trying to be a reenactor and you're delusional. I mean, that's strong language, but I'll just say that.
Yeah, so I think the tension is between, your original point, which is let's get clarity. Let's not throw terms around that don't, represent, accuracy. So let's labor to do the hard work, which in the paper you do, and you refer to sources and Aristotle and define what an art is and defining what liberal means, so that you excluded other parts. That's what definition is.
Exactly.
So if you say it's an innovation, you're just saying come to terms with the fact that you're not doing X, Y, and Z, and I am doing something that's innovative here.
Right, exactly. So, for example, when I went through my discussion, I told you that I've embraced a notion of liberality that distanced me from Seneca.
Mm-hmm.
Seneca thinks liberality means a liberal endeavor is an endeavor for a free man as opposed to a slave in subsistence work. I'm saying, and if you ask Seneca or Aristotle for that matter, what a liberal art is, he's going to say, yeah, it's that. It refers to a class distinction, right? And I'm going to say, no, I'm not with Seneca on that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what clarity does. Now, Seneca says a ton of things that I learned from, but I don't want to read the word liberal and treat it like, again, back to the Shakespeare thing, gay.
Right.
Oh, right. He's talking about homosexual, right? No, he's talking about this class distinction thing, which I don't embrace. And then I can talk to him and learn from him because, I'm picking up things that are sensible and accord with, what I think is true, good, and beautiful, and jettisoning some things that I think are in error, dare I say it, in Seneca.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
that's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. And that helps to explain, like, with accreditation, for example, I'm, another organization, ACCS, but I'm chairing an accreditation commission that's clarifying academic standards. So we avoid this kind of muddle of misunderstandings about Sayers and some of the older terminology that was in vogue. And because we all understand that classical education is about this project of recovering these voices and having them speak to us, but speak with clarity rather than muddle.
Fair enough. Okay, we have time for one more question here from Sarah Kennedy. She says, for many of our parents, we're a spreading hope style school. Liberal arts and visual arts as a career may feel like a luxury that is beyond the economic demands of their present reality.
Right.
In other words, they may understand and have been told by local education and may be correct that STEM fields are a pathway out of situation or generational poverty in ways that liberal arts might not be. So have you seen a thoughtful mosaic or hybrid models of these?
Yeah, that's a good question. First of all, this is the part of the problem or challenge, and it's in your question is whatever liberal arts is, it's not STEM, and whatever STEM is, that's liberal arts. And if you follow my definition of liberal arts, I am not buying into that dichotomy. In fact, my notion of liberal arts is averse to pitting STEM over against liberal arts. So this is where definition becomes important. So educate your parents. A liberal art is actually going to make you the most productive, useful person, even in today's job market. The labor market data is out on this, that the average person in today's, through their career life, changes careers from 3 to 5 times. And it is this ridiculous misnomer, despite what college promoters will tell you, that the name on your degree equals the name of your job title. That might be true for the next, like your first hire, but people who are 5 years, 10 years on, and these are statistics that make a lot of universities very uncomfortable. that people who are in their careers and you see what they major in, that kind of connection is much more circuitous than the practical minded college educators want to say. And we need our parents to understand just the realities of job market, innovation, change. That's what makes people most outfitted and prepared for today's market.
Thank you. I'm the one who asked the question. Just really quickly, if I could follow up, what about families for whom a four-year college is probably not going to be a reality for them? Same answer?
Yeah, that would be the same answer. I would say you're thinking too small for your kids, which is a challenge. You need to think big. Now, there's also, I mean, your community. I can just kind of speak in the abstract here, but relationally, I think that this is messaging that takes time to build on many fronts, and I don't think any quick slogan would ever be the answer. I mean, you're asking such an important question that in a forum like this, my fear is that I mean, the best I can do is kind of a slogan response when you need something that's quite a bit more, because it's important. But retraining our vocabulary and our categories, I think, are really important. And so STEM, part of it is breaking down that divide between STEM and liberal arts. That's a perverse notion. I would argue it's a perverse notion of liberal arts that's actually alien. No one talks about the liberal arts except people within the last 100 years. No one talks about the liberal arts in a way that juxtaposes it with STEM.
Thank
I think
you.
it's a good, actually probably reinforces the point you said from the beginning, which is we got to understand our terms here and get clarity and know what we mean when we say these things, and especially relative to the tradition we're trying to advocate, and doing that and situating with the way the terms are used now, which is kind of a big deal. It's a big calling. It's hard to do all that and get it straight, right? And within your audiences, and there's a lot of wisdom, I think, to Chris's point too, that has to be utilized to message as well within our own respective communities. So still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah.
Well,
technical training, I think that's really the pathway to premature obsolescence, because that's training is ordered to a task, whereas education equips somebody with the capacity to make moves and adjustments. It frees them for further learning. I mean, labor market analysts call that intellectual dexterity. That's their term for it, but that's what the liberal arts fortify. And there's, when I was in college, people were talking about COBOL and Fortran. If I was trained up in that, then I'm obsolete now.
No, that's good. I think that's well said. Thank you guys for being on the call. Chris, thank you so much. It's really helpful. So much more that we could get into. I encourage you all again to get the piece from the Principia publication, where again, he has this article on what is a liberal art and unpacks each one of these ideas, and you can take it further and discuss it with your own community. So thanks again. Appreciate it, Chris. All of you guys have a great day. Thank you for being on the call.
All right. Thank you all so much. It's been an honor. Thanks a lot, Eric, and to all of you.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you.